I now call to order the April 11th meeting of the Wellington Board of Trustees, time being 6:32 p.m. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
May I get a roll call, please?
Certainly. Trustee Gaiter. Here. Trustee Daly.
Present.
Trustee Mason.
Here.
Trustee Teets.
Here.
Trustee Wiegand. Here. Mayor Pro Tem McDonald.
Here.
Mayor Chaussee.
Here.
Thank you.
Are there any amendments to the agenda this evening? No. Are there any conflicts of interest related to the agenda this evening? No. All right, at this time, we'll move on to item B1, that is public comment. Individuals wishing to speak on non-agenda items are asked to write their name on the form over there and approach the podium. You'll be given 3 minutes to speak. I will note that the board may not consider any public comment on the land use map, as the public hearing for this item has already been closed. So feel free.
Yes. Hi, I am super excited to tell you guys about a very awesome event. It is the Sunshine Circus. And we have a flyer up on the bulletin board. One of the things that Wellington is so great at is supporting people in need. And so there is a member of our community who has stage 4 cancer, and he found that out and lost his job on the same day. So it was a tough blow. So this event is a fundraising event for him. And it is going to be on Sunday, May 7th at Bartels Farm. I think that's North Fort Collins, LaPorte. And so I just wanted to give you a little information on it. So from 2 to 5, we have the family friendly part. And then from 5 to 8, we have the adult part, or actually 6 to 8, sorry, 2 to 6, 6 to 8. So we have food trucks, we have a petting zoo, we have cotton candy, face painting, balloon maker, bake sale, tumblers, we have circus performers, lollipop dancer, fire spinning, fortune teller, a beer garden. From 6 to 8, we'll have Geo from The Last Comic Standing performing and the band Wicked Vixen. So we're going to have silent auction items. We'll have donation jars. The Rockabilly Vixens, who are a fundraising community support group here in Wellington, they're doing the bake sale for us. They are going to be providing us with the tattoo lady and the bearded woman. So it is going to be a great event to support someone in our community, and all the proceeds go to him and his family, and we are just super duper excited. Again, there's a flyer on the wall out there. You can look it up in Facebook events under Sunshine Circus, and there's a QR code on the flyer that'll get you directly to the Facebook event page to sign up for it. I mean, to get more information. So just super excited and just wanted to share it with you guys.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, trustees. Couple of things. One, a quick advance. Oh, sorry, Lisa Cholet. I live in Wellington Downs. I wanted to give you an advance thank you for what you're going to do tonight in terms of autism awareness and acceptance. As a mom of a kid with autism, I think it's important for people to understand that being neurodiverse and different doesn't make you less. So I appreciate what you're doing tonight after this part. Also, I wanted to bring to, I'm sure your attention, you already know, but everyone else's attention that we do have an election coming up for Wellington Fire Protection District on May 2nd. You have a few options. You can, of course, vote in person. If you're unable to vote in person at the fire department across the street, you do have the ability to vote by absentee ballot. There's an application that's available on the Wellington Fire Protection District's website. I'm inquiring to find out if we can maybe have some already printed for people who don't have internet access, and maybe here at the library or town, depending on what's allowed, because it is an election. And those have to be submitted by April 25th. And then they can be returned to a designated election official, or they can actually be emailed in and that information is on the absentee ballot itself. I did get information from the director of the election, and for in-person voting, photo ID is encouraged but not required. I know there's been some confusion out there, so I wanted to clear that up. But I really encourage everyone to exercise their right to vote. I know that these special district elections don't get the attention maybe that they should, but these folks put their lives on the line for us every day, and we need to make sure that the people sitting on the board have their best interests in heart and ours as well. And so I just wanted to share that with you. And then if I get an opportunity to find out where we can put those, perhaps as a town, we can get that information out as well. And I would really appreciate your help in that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Karen Eifert. I live in the Knolls. Sorry, I was confused when I talked to Patti earlier. She said right after the Pledge of Allegiance, we're going to do the, so sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I did want to talk in public comment tonight. I was here last week and I saw some things on the way the board was ran last week that I thought, you know, many people on this board themselves have talked about equality. And I think that's something that should be followed all the time, not just some of the times. So a member of the board said, I don't want to speak right now. I need a few minutes. And Mary said, well, I like you to speak right now, but turnabout's fair play. You've had other people on this very same board say, I need a few minutes to collect my thoughts, or I'm not ready yet. And it's been always, okay, we'll move on to the next person. So I want to remind you that the town of Wellington residents expect equality all of the time, not some of the times when it suits what your agenda is for that meeting or your agenda is with that person. And also we shouldn't see any of you persecute each other when we're in this building. I wouldn't want to see John say anything bad about the mayor. I'd put him in his place in a heartbeat. He knows that, but I know John. But I would tell all of you, if you're speaking ill about somebody else on this board, I don't want to hear it. You need to knock it off, grow up, and be the example you're meant to be here. You're elected officials. You're not here to show people how to gripe and complain and be mean to each other and bully each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. This evening, we have two proclamations. The first proclamation is going to be for National Volunteer Week. And the chair members of the town's Finance Committee, Planning Commission, and Prost Board are going to be here to receive on behalf of those committees for us this evening. I'd like to welcome Christine Gaiter, Eric Starter, and then as well Laurelyn Bockelman to the podium. I will read the proclamation and I will hand them out to you guys. So whereas recognition of volunteerism in the United States was first established by the Presidential Proclamation of 1974, celebrated annually. And whereas during this week, all over the nation, several projects will be performed and volunteers recognized for their commitment to serve and invest in enhancing their community and the lives of others. And whereas the town of Wellington is proud of all volunteers and wishes to recognize these members of our community who selflessly serve those around them and make our community strong and an incredible place to live. Now, therefore, I, Calar Chaussee, Mayor of the town of Wellington, Colorado, do hereby proclaim the week of April 16th through the 22nd, 2023 as Volunteer Week in the town of Wellington, and I urge all of the fellow citizens to volunteer in our local community organizations. We have another proclamation, and this one is to celebrate Autism Awareness Month. Miss Karen Eifert is here and will receive the proclamation on behalf of the town. I welcome Miss Eifert and her boys to the podium if they would like. And I will read the proclamation now. Whereas autism is a lifelong disability resulting in significant impairment of an individual's ability to communicate, understand social interactions, and develop appropriate interactive behaviors. And whereas autism affects not only the distinguished individual, but the entire family and the community at large. Now therefore, I, Calar Chaussee, Mayor of the Town of Wellington, Colorado, do hereby proclaim the month of April as Autism Awareness Month in the Town of Wellington and encourage all citizens to become educated about autism, support nonprofit organizations that bring hope to all those who struggle with this disorder. Thank you. All right, next we have a presentation, transit presentation, about a survey that was conducted on behalf of the town, Trustee Gaiter and Miss Betty Aragon and Miss Adriana. Yeah, and Patti Garcia. Please proceed with your presentation.
No, I don't. Sit up. They were here.
Check the
Oh, here
podium.
they are.
Oh.
Dan was keeping them. Town attorney, of course. You bet. Thank you for the reminder. You betcha. There you go.
I'm actually going to use it. Perfect. All right. Well, good evening, Mayor and Board of Trustees and members of the public. John Gaiter, trustee of the Town of Wellington. And here to give an update on the transportation pilot program that has really been a process that has been ongoing for about almost 2 years now, that this process has started. And so had a successful pilot. We'll talk a little bit about that. I'm going to speak primarily a little bit about how this started, and then I'll speak to how this ties into our strategic plan. And then I'm going to have Betty actually speak to how this came about from the community perspective. Betty was actually responsible for raising over 90% of the funding for this transportation pilot program, and really helped to bring this together. And then also would love to have her share a little bit about what the community is looking to see out of this. Ms. Garcia is going to share a little bit about the interaction we've had with some of the other government entities. And then really the goal after this is for us as a board to have a conversation. We've really reached a point at this point. I've been kind of driving this with Betty and Adriana, and then Ms. Garcia has been helping us to kind of interact with other government agencies. But at this point, we've reached where if we continue looking into other options, it has to go beyond just the two of us working on this, and we need to actually have staff time. So before we start putting town resources in that's something we as a board need to have a conversation about. So this really actually began out of a conversation that Betty and I had probably about 2 years ago, and then really had come to that, you know, the town has not really done a great job at connecting with the Hispanic community and really understanding what our needs were. And what came out of that was a meeting that Patti and I attended with Betty and other members of the community. Our prior mayor actually joined us for, I think, our second meeting. We had a county commissioner come out, and there was kind of two things that one was immediate action was taken was they asked that we have better hours for the bulk water dispenser. And Ms. Garcia was able to work with staff to get that taken care of right away. The other big thing that came out was there was a lot of families that don't have multiple vehicles, and they were having issues with transportation into Fort Collins. And they would really like to see a way to get into Fort Collins. And at the time, there was nothing in place that Wellington had. And so we started looking into how could we do a pilot program. So our senior center had received a new bus through a grant with Lamar County and was in the process of selling their old bus. So we actually had a town vehicle that was available, and we were able to work with the senior center where they allowed us to utilize the bus. We got another member of the community who was bilingual, who was able to drive for us, a young man named Atlas, who is a student at Front Range Community College. Did an amazing job for us, you know, was a huge benefit to the town. And then basically we had a 10-week program where we took the bus on Mondays and Wednesdays, get my days straight here, from Wellington in the morning down to Fort Collins, and then came back, was it? Wednesdays and Saturdays. I was gonna say Mondays, Wednesdays and Saturdays, Wednesdays and Saturdays. Took the bus into the Northern Transit Station, dropped people off right there so they could connect in with Fort Collins Transit System, and then brought people back to Wellington, and then went back in the afternoon to pick people up and then bring them back again. And so really we had the big thing that I saw that came out of this. So on our strategic plan, let me find the right one here. Under infrastructure, our number 2 is review and develop partnerships and enhance focus on transportation solutions such as street, bridge, facility, sidewalk, and accessibility improvements. And so one of the things that we really talked about when we went through the strategic planning process as a board is how do we get better relationships with the other members of our community around us, whether that be Larimer County, City of Fort Collins, CDOT, all these different people. How do we engage with that? One of the big things that came out of this is we actually got a lot of publication from the Coloradoan put an article out, CSU put information out. I actually got a call from CSU where we're about halfway through the pilot program. We're like, we didn't know you guys were doing this. They have over 230 employees that actually live in Wellington or in the surrounding area that are commuting in. And that's something they had actually done a survey, I think it was 2.5 years ago, about transportation. And a lot of their employees had said, we'd love to have some kind of an option to get out here. And then CSU also has the RDEC facility, which is kind of out east of the freeway, where they have students and staff that are trying to get up there as well. And so they were like pleading, like, let's sit down and talk. We'd love to try and engage with you guys, especially if you try to move this forward, because this would be very helpful for our staff as well as for our students to be able to have access to that. And so it opened some doors to the relationship with that. It was something that Patti can talk a little bit more about engaging with Fort Collins, but Fort Collins was incredibly helpful with allowing us to connect in, and we're very positive about that. And then Commissioner Kafalis also, when we were talking about this, he was very excited to help out and work with us on that. And so we really had a lot of engagement with those other partners. So to give you a couple of stats, we had a total of 24 riders throughout the process of the pilot program that came from Wellington into Fort Collins in the morning. And then we had a total of 26 that were coming back in the afternoon. So we had a total of 50 riders throughout the 10 weeks. It started off slow because we didn't really have a lot of people didn't know about it. And then as we kind of got through, we started to see that jump up. Our highest numbers we had was we had one day where we had a trip to Fort Collins where the bus had 9 people on it. It only sat 10 people. So we used all but one seat. And then that same day coming back to Wellington, we had 8 people that were on the bus coming back. So as we kind of got into that, we started to see that there was more utilization happening on that. One of the big things that I saw that really came out of that, though, was the engagement with the other entities around us who were saying, here are some different options. Patti and I had about an 1.5 to 2 hour meeting with CSU, and they really kind of talked to us a little bit about other things that they've done with other municipalities. They also kind of went through different options that we could have to look at as a town if we wanted to look at something. And it really just helped to build that level of where they said, you know, if you guys need to do surveys, if you want engagement, if you want data, we will help get that to you. And that's a nice thing when you have the largest employer in Larimer County saying, hey, we've got resources, especially the college, to do this, to say, hey, we think this is a great idea and we'd love to help you guys pursue this if you think that's an option you want to go through. So I will be happy to answer questions when we have discussion, but I'd like to go and turn over to Betty and have her talk a little bit about this from her perspective and the community.
Mayor, Trustee, thank you so much for the opportunity to come and speak. This pilot program really came about by a combined effort. And I was really grateful that Trustee John Gaiter was willing to listen and Patti came in and helped. You know, I was really surprised, I have to be honest with you. We're part of Larimer County, and I just couldn't believe that we didn't have a bus system out here that went to Fort Collins. And so with that question, what can we do? I think that there's a need here. It's a small town, but it's growing. And we need to make sure that we have accessibility for people that need transportation. If families have only one car or a car breaks down and they need to get to Fort Collins, that's a 10-mile walk if they have to walk. So, you know, we need to have options. I think that that is so important. That's a key word right there. We need options, that we need to be able to have accessibility to Fort Collins, ways to get there. It's not only by taxi or by Uber or dial a ride. It has to be a bus system that people can afford. I network with a lot of different organizations in Fort Collins. I have a nonprofit. It's called Mujeres de Colores, Women of Colors. And I have done tremendous work in Fort Collins. Certainly through my nonprofit, I have a large community of networking that I do in Fort Collins. Through that networking, I was able to speak with Deidre Sullivan of United Way and gave her the pitch about this pilot program. And they were willing to take a chance on us and funded us the money that we needed for this program. So I was really pleased with that. And of course, I've given them a follow-up of exactly just how successful it really was and the need that we should continue to pursue. Feedback, again, what we got from many people was we didn't get an ability to be able to do a lot of marketing in the beginning. So a lot of people didn't really know about it. But I think as more people learned about it, they were excited. Then they started talking about how about getting some more times available where the bus would pick up and different locations. Since this was an 8-week pilot program, we were limited on how many stops we could make and what times. Definitely the ridership, we've got a lot of young people in our community here and they need an outlet. They need to be able to get to Fort Collins. Summer's coming. They want to be able to go to a lot of the recreational places in Fort Collins and they need a way to get there. A lot of times mom and dad are working and there's just not a way for them to take them. Again, options. We need ridership availability. So and I hear this all the time and I love it when I hear people say, this is an inclusive community. And I work to make sure that we are inclusive of all people. It's not even just the Hispanic community that would probably utilize this bus system. We just heard CSU has many residents here in Wellington that work in Fort Collins at CSU that would utilize that bus system. So I hope that showing that there was a need and that it was very successful, that we can continue to talk about possible partnerships with CSU and other entities in Fort Collins that can make this a possibility. We should already have one in place. So thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Mayor and Trustees. Patti, Garcia, Town Administrator. So this was really fun to work on because a lot of times in local government, you're just set on a specific project or something and it's a requirement of your municipality. So this was stepping outside of the normal box of, water and wastewater plants and things like that. So the opportunity to talk to other municipalities about how they're handling transportation and transit issues was very open. Spoke with Windsor, who operates the Poudre Express, and all of this information is in your packet so that the public can see as well. So they operate the Poudre Express. Berthoud has their own transportation. They call it BATS, Berthoud Area Transportation System. And then the opportunity for Northern Colorado residents to use the Flex transit system, which is outside of the transport system. One of the things that I found through talking to the other municipalities is this does not pay for itself. Transit does not pay for itself. I had one person tell me the amount of money they spend on transit, they could buy everybody who participates a car. So it's an expensive endeavor and it is money that has to be fronted by the municipality. There are some grant funds. We are learning about grant funds that are available, but it's certainly not enough to cover the costs. On the second page of the memo or the summary that I provided in the packet, it talks about the Colorado-Wyoming transit feasibility study, which was finalized in January of 2023. And that was included in your packet because it provided some really in-depth and good detail about what ridership would look like in Northern Colorado and what the study and what their surveys found. Wellington is considered a hotspot, which is great for Wellington. We are considered a location between Cheyenne and Fort Collins where transit makes sense. They have not identified Wellington as a stop yet, but they are still, they'll be we'll be starting discussions. They will start reaching out to the municipalities and we can ask them to create a stop in Wellington. We can provide some of our data for that. They've got the survey data already to show that it's a need and it's a spot. But, you know, in talking to those that participated in that study, Wellington's definitely on the radar and is definitely on one of the top 3 stops. You know, they come down from Cheyenne down I-25 and either come through Wellington or Mulberry. So I'm thinking Wellington makes a whole lot of sense because Mulberry already has its own transit system. So again, this was a great opportunity for me to work with Trustee Gaiter and Betty. It was really fun. But looking for some direction from the trustees, and I'll let Trustee Gaiter head that off about how you would like to proceed. And if, you know, you want to have more staff time put into this or just follow up with the Cheyenne, the Colorado Wyoming Transit Feasibility Study. So thank you.
Thank you. So perfect. I do have some kind of proposed options. I think I can go over that with deliberations. And if Mayor, if you're open to that, I'd love to open this up to members of the public. If anyone would like to speak, whether in favor or in opposition, I want to hear really if there are any members of the community that have feedback on this. I'd love to hear that as well. And then I'd be happy to kind of go through my thoughts in terms of what some next steps might be.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Hi, Karen Eifert, the Knowles. I was really excited. I didn't realize that it was going to be like a ongoing thing to happen with the transit system. And I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Betty. As Betty was saying about diversity and those types of things, one of the biggest things that they talk to us about with our children with special needs after high school is that they need some skills to learn how to get around. And to do that, public transportation is the best way to go. And we can have people who are trained to go with them through the different agencies that we have to teach them how to ride the bus and teach them how to do time management and to watch where we're going in Fort Collins, where we're going in Wellington. And I just think it's a really great opportunity for not only adult people doing work and wanting to go shopping, but also an amazing resource. Sorry, he's not used to me talking when I'm doing this. He's still learning. Amazing resource for our community members that have intellectual and developmental disabilities to have a chance to figure out how to ride a transit system in case they're ever in Fort Collins. Maybe they're at their vocational rehab job and somebody can't come pick them up exactly at the right time, but maybe their parent or their caregiver says, hey, let's meet at the mall. I can meet you at the red bench out in front of such and such store on that transit system that they'll start to learn from here, from Wellington to go to Fort Collins. They'll be able to expand that knowledge through help and coaching of a trained personnel to teach them how to do those things. So thank you so much. This is wonderful for all types of communities. I'm really great to see it happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
I didn't know we would be able to talk on this. Lisa Chalet, first and foremost, I just want to thank you, Betty, for bringing it to the attention of Trustee Gaiter and for your hard work. And of course, Patti and everyone that's been involved. As a mom of a teenager and aware of all the teenagers that are in our town, some of the things that our school district offer are opportunities to take classes at Front Range. They now have internship programs where kids can be matched with future ideas or future job possibilities where they can go an internship. And all of those things aren't necessarily located here in Wellington. And as a community full of working families, and most of us can't afford to send our kids on Ubers and things of that nature, and we have our own jobs and responsibilities, I think it would be an amazing opportunity for our young people to learn some responsibility and independence and accountability and actually be able to seek out some things that will actually improve their lives instead of, you know, running around here causing havoc. Not all the time, but you know what I mean? It will give them an opportunity to expand what they would really like to do. And I would just like to reiterate what she said. My husband and I were a single vehicle family for a very, very long time. And it is very disheartening to not be able to rely on public transportation when you really need to. And if we as a town can find a way to prioritize that, it meets a lot of different goals, some of which are not our own, but are maybe broader goals in the county or the state. But I would like to see the town really consider this opportunity and see if there isn't a way that we can't make that happen on a very consistent and reliable basis to provide options for every member of our community that would wish to use it. Never mind, I have students at CSU. Parking per semester, I think it's like $500. I don't know how many bus passes that buys, but it's got to be a lot. So I think that the opportunities with the proper ability to really market it, I think you would find that there would be a high usage here in Wellington. So I encourage you to really consider the options. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. We'll move on to discussion on the topic. Before we start this evening, going to limit everybody, the whole meeting, to 3 minutes of speaking time, and we'll do that from this meeting on throughout the rest of my term, just to make sure that we can keep things moving, be productive, and get things done. Go for it, Trustee Gaiter.
Perfect. So thank you again, Betty, for pulling this together. And I think what was important on this was that it was something that was important for the community. And what was huge to me was that this was fully funded by community. And again, over 90% of that came from Betty's nonprofit. But it was great to see that as something that we needed to see proof of concept. Like, okay, if we do something, we were in this unique situation. We had a vehicle, we had someone who could drive it. And it was like, will people use it? And even though we didn't market it as great as we wanted to, and there's so much that could have been done better. But our goal really was to not maximize staff time. We really wanted us to be me and Betty and other members of the community doing the work, and then having Patti do as little as possible so that it wasn't taking away from her other duties. And to see that even we had 50 people over the short period of that utilize it was huge. And then again, the interactions with the other entities was kind of big. So kind of when we talked with CSU, because they've had a lot of experience with setting up different transportation programs, they kind of put it as there's kind of 3 different routes that you can go down. You can go down the route kind of like Patti shared with Berthoud, where you actually have your own transportation system and you set that up, and it's kind of, you've got it's Wellington transportation. That obviously is the highest expense way to go. I don't know that that would be the right route at this point. They said kind of a second opportunity is to look at connecting into an existing transportation system. So for example, seeing if Transport is willing to put a stop in Wellington and connect into one of their lines that's already running through the north side of Fort Collins. Would they be willing to, work with Wellington where we have some sort of a fee that we pay? Maybe we build the station, we build the stop up here. We also pay some monthly fee or whatever, and then they put that together, or connecting into something that's more regional. So that would be looking at something like the Flex line that runs from Berthoud, or potentially if we do have something like the line from Wyoming coming down into Fort Collins, potentially connecting into something like that. And I think that from my perspective, really kind of the next steps for us, if we do want to go through this, because as Patti mentioned, there's definitely an expense. Like it's not going to be free. We know that. And it's not something that's going to be a revenue generator for the town. But again, it's something that we've heard, hey, this is something that is a need. But the challenge is from here to start to look at what is it going to cost us. I would lean more towards not even looking into the option of creating our own transportation system right now. I just think that there's not enough need for that, but I think we should really look heavily into the other two. And I don't think it should be let's wait to hear from, let's let Wyoming and CDOT know, hey, we are actively trying to put this together. How can we engage to have Wellington become a stop? Have our staff actively communicating with City of Fort Collins and with the Flex line to find out and basically bring us back as a board. Hey, here are some options. Here's what it looks like if we work with Transport. Here's what it looks like if we work with the Flex line. Here's the timeline for, this Colorado and Wyoming. And then at that point, and I would say this is probably over the next few months, then we can actually start looking at the cost of those different options and say, okay, does this make sense? Can we fit this in our budget at this point? But that obviously to do that, it's going to have to take some staff time. And so I felt that that is something that we need as a board to say, yes, we are okay with staff actually exploring options. It's not saying, yes, we're absolutely doing this because we don't know what it costs yet. But for us to find that out, there's going to have to be some staff time. So that would be my request, is I think that at this point, it would be good to have staff start to look into kind of those second and third options. whether we can either connect in with, Fort Collins, or if we connect in with more of a regional one, but to kind of start those conversations and figure out what can be done and what the cost would be on that. So, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that any of you've got about the pilot program. And I did again want to make sure that we do thank the senior center as well, because they were trying to sell their van and they waited to sell it so that we could do the transportation pilot program. So I greatly appreciate their willingness to work with us on that and allow us to continue working with the vehicle.
Awesome. Start with Trustee Wiegand. You got any questions or input on this?
No questions. I think what we need to do right now is find the money, find the partner, figure out which way we want to go. Fort Collins, I would think that would be a great avenue for a partner with them and CSU. And I think it's a good start. I mean, it's going to be support for the whole community. And again, for the kids, for the students, and for every avenue. Fantastic. Thank you.
Trustee Teets?
Yes, one thing I did want to share before I give my feedback on this is anyone who's looking for safe youth transportation, there is a program that I have utilized. It's called Hop Skip Drive, and it only transports youth. You can't transport adults. All of the drivers go through extensive background checks. A lot of them are retired teachers that do this transportation. But if you go online, they have a fare estimator and everything. So you can actually secure transport to doctor's visits from high school, from middle school. So that's an option to anybody until transportation moves forward. It's an additional option out there for people. On the side of exploring options, I'm with option 2 and 3. I don't think financially it would be fiscally responsible of us to plan for our own independent transportation, knowing that we have things we're still working on and a budget that we've been paying a lot of attention to. So I am open to further exploration on both the partnership or the Colorado, Wyoming. I did notice there was a few things with the Wyoming one I would have additional questions about if it were to come back to us.
Thank you. Trustee Daly.
This one kind of is very personal to me because when I was in middle school, for our household, that was a 1-hour household. Our family option was that I actually did school of choice in Fort Collins. And the reason why is because I could be dropped off when my parents went to work, and then I could use transport to get around town for the rest of the day. And then my dad would pick me up and take me home. So it's a similar situation. I lived in Waverly, so I was supposed to be at Wellington Middle High School. I missed out on that because of this exact scenario. So, and luckily we did have one vehicle. So, but with that said, I heard a lot of things in this conversation. So the first one is, I don't think it's financially feasible for us to have our own transportation system. I think that's been acknowledged. But I think what we really need to do at this point is make sure every organization and transportation system knows that we're interested and willing and ready, and we want to participate. And I don't see the harm in that and creating those partnerships, which we have already created in our strategic plan, saying that we're going to develop partnerships. So when the opportunity arises, or they want to engage or brainstorm with the organization, they know Wellington's ready to play. So I'm all in for those options, to make sure we have those relationships, and then to pursue those further to see what our options are. The other big thing that stood out to me is, why are people needing transportation to Fort Collins? And from the people I talked to and what I've heard tonight, this is the brief list. I know that's not inclusive of everything, but recreation. Another one is healthcare and services that aren't available in Wellington. Childcare, surprisingly enough. Well, it's not surprising. There's not enough childcare in Wellington. That's not a surprise. But what is a surprise is there's not county facilities for childcare that offer the county support or anything like that in Wellington. So if somebody were to want those services, they would need to drive their child to Fort Collins to have assistance with childcare, and then potentially have to drive back to Wellington to work or wherever they might work doesn't make sense. So that's a concern. During the State of Our Youth program, that group that got together with Poudre School District, a lot of really wonderful actions came out of it. And all of them did not occur or will not be spaces in Wellington.
10 seconds.
Okay, so transporting our kids to those kind of services and spaces also isn't available. So how do we make those things here to prevent the need or to help in the meantime?
Thank you. Trustee Mason.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Aragon and Ms. Garcia and Trustee Gaiter for putting together this pilot program. I think at this point, it certainly shows that with Wellington is getting to be about the size where we can see that something like this is going to be of use. And certainly I would stand by the rest of the trustees here and say that, yeah, I would like to see staff hours be put into some of this, see if, what options there are as far as CSU goes. To Trustee Gaiter's point, if we can build our own bus stop or something like that up here, that would help maybe incentivize to want to jump in on something like that. I think that would be very appropriate. And certainly if there's any grant funding we can pursue behind that, that would be excellent. But yeah, I think this is very important and there's a clear need. I think we've got the data for it now and this is a good deal. So.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thanks for saving me towards the end because they pretty much hit all of the points. And Trustee Gaiter, thank you so much for exploring this. The town started to explore this about 10 years ago and we were shot down miserably because we just didn't have the population quite yet, but now we do. And we have a diverse population with a high set of needs. And I would agree that if we want to we obviously can't afford a transportation system ourselves. So if we want to entice partnerships, I would agree that we should look into the cost of what it would take for an easement and construction to build a stop. That way, we at least have a general idea of, how much that specific piece would take. Because I think that you'd be surprised. It's a little bit more complicated than just putting up a bench and throwing out a concrete slab. So yes, the ongoing operations and maintenance of trying to run our own transportation system is not feasible at this time, but I would also support the exploration of what it would cost the town to potentially build the stop ourselves and use that as a tool moving forward.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Betty Aragon. Thank you, Trustee Gaiter, Ms. Garcia, everybody that was involved in this. Yeah, it's a need. I'm all for moving forward for options, partnerships, figuring out what it may cost for a stop, things of that nature. So I think the board is in agreement to move forward to continue pursuing this so we can come to some sort of solution to get the residents what they need and get people into town and get them out of town and all that good stuff. So yeah, I think that's good direction, right, board?
Good, Patty?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes, I'll get it set on a future meetings agenda, probably towards the end of the summer.
Okay.
Okay.
Perfect. All right, next up is the consent agenda. It consists of the following items: the meetings of the the minutes from March 28, 2023 board meeting, resolution making the town appointments of the Board of Adjustments, and a resolution making appointments to the Planning Commission. May I get a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I second.
May I get a roll call, please?
Certainly. Trustee Mason,
Yes.
trustee Teets,
Yes.
trustee Wiegand,
Yes.
trustee Daly,
Yes.
trustee Gaiter,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem McDonald.
Did you receive the clerical correction?
I did.
Thank you.
And I emailed you on it, yes. Mayor Chaussee,
Yes.
thank you.
All right, next we have first action item, ordinance number 3, 2023, an ordinance amending the official zoning map of town. We'll proceed with the action items, first of which is the ordinance. I will note once again, there will be no public comment on this item as the hearing has already been closed. And Mr. Byrd, Planning Director, will present this item. Mr. Byrd.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Muhs, could you advance me to a panelist in the presentation? Thank you. While we're getting that going for the presentation slides, I'll start with a brief introduction. The mayor introduced it very well. This agenda item is for the zoning map consideration which has been a process that began almost a year ago. And a lot of thought and effort's been put into it. Click on this and get it going. The Board of Trustees did hear this at the March 28th meeting. It was the public hearing for the zoning map, and there were nearly 40 or 50 pages of information associated with that agenda packet. We didn't want to recreate and reintroduce that whole agenda packet, so we provided the link to that in tonight's agenda, so those resources were still available without adding all those extra pages to your packet. And from the March 28th hearing and deliberations by the board, there were a handful of properties or areas that were identified in those conversations that staff took as the direction from the board to bring back more information on those particular properties to answer those questions. And so that is what we are presenting to you tonight as soon as it loads up here for the slides. But to focus in on those handful of properties and areas that received some questions and feedback from the trustees, and to provide some clarity on those areas. I got it. It's just took a while. I've got it going now and I'm working on the screen. Thank you. And then the delay between screen and the there it is. So there's the map. Just a quick reminder, this step of the process is following on the heels of comprehensive plan adoption in 2021 and land use code adoption in 2022. We're now in 2023 and presenting the zoning map amendments to bring the official zoning map of the town in alignment with those other documents. Planning Commission has conducted a series of public meetings over the last year, including work sessions, public meetings, and a public hearing. And the Planning Commission has forwarded a recommendation to the Board of Trustees, presented in the form of the zoning map that was in the March 28th packet. This zoning map which was in your packet is the exact same zoning map as presented in the March 28th. We didn't want to confuse anything by making any changes to it. The only thing we did change was the date on it to reflect tonight's meeting date. This slide has a lot of text on it. It basically highlights the significant changes that were addressed in the official zoning map amendment proposed, including a new zoning district category. The transitional zoning that was on the zoning map before was completely eliminated. So new zoning districts are needed to identify those properties that were previously zoned transitional. The R4 downtown neighborhoods was specifically created based on feedback from the comp plan land use code process, including the recommendation to zone the properties along Harrison and McKinley Avenue, the residential properties, to that R4 zone category based on those owners' desires and intent of the board. The C2 downtown 4 commercial zone district is recommended to be applied to a couple of the non-residential properties in those areas, just based on existing land uses and business uses. There's some other clerical updates, including updates to titles to reflect the land use code. R4 to R3 is a change significant, basically title only, but we did go ahead and notify all those property owners of that change in case they needed it for record keeping for their property records. And there were a limited number of existing properties that have primarily business uses on them that were zoned something different. And in the overall evaluation, the Planning Commission had recommended those old zoning categories really don't make sense based on the context of the land use code and the comp plan and what those areas are intended to be. And so the Planning Commission recommended changes for those. Those property owners were provided notice of the in consideration for a different zoning category for those properties. The Planning Commission made recommendations on townwide on the P public zone district properties using kind of a unified standard across the townwide for what are those properties intended for? Are they open for public access? Should they be zoned public or should they be zoned something similar to the compatible surrounding land use categories? And those recommendations of the Planning Commission are reflected on the zoning map that's in your agenda packet. And last, we just did a lot of cleanup on the map. It looks a lot different than the old map. We changed the color ramps to get more contrast, and we did some cleanup on the parcel boundaries. We did add street names to this map. I know the last agenda. Sorry, that one was a miss. We were focused on getting the colors and everything else right, and we forgot the street labels. So we did get those added. Hopefully that helped in your packet this time. So that would be our intent, is to make sure those are on the final. As we mentioned, the March 28th meeting, public hearing was conducted to consider this zoning map, and it was tabled to tonight. The next couple slides are, I'm providing some additional background information and context for those kind of key areas, or focus areas is what I refer to them as, that were identified for some additional discussion. This slide just shows those areas across town, where they're located, and just kind of corresponding letters so that you can follow along with those areas on the slides that are following. So focus area A is a property at Washington Avenue and County Road 9, kind of catty corner from the new middle school, high school. It is currently zone transitional. As I mentioned, that transitional zone category no longer exists in the land use code. It wasn't serving the intended function. And so the recommendation and adopted documents state that we need to assign a new zoning category, all those transitional properties, to identify what the intended future uses could be. This question was raised primarily by the property owner in a public forum or public hearing, kind of stating a desire for C3 zoning consideration for the site. The Planning Commission have recommended C1 community commercial based on the existing environs. There's C1 across the street at the school-owned property that is currently vacant. So there was some compatibility there. It's adjacent to residential and a commercial corridor. So there was the C1 community commercial is really intended to be compatible with both residential and a higher intensity commercial development. So that was the Planning Commission's recommendation for this property. There's not any C3 nearby, so it would be a little out of context for any additional adjacent C3 zoning in this area. So that wasn't part of the recommendation. What I've done in these slides is kind of provide two alternatives to kind of keep things simple. For this particular property, the C1 is the recommended zoning. When presenting as an alternative, the C3, because that was requested by the owner. So just for some context in these, a lot of this is process of elimination. A residential zone category didn't make any sense for this property, neither did industrial. So the remaining categories are C1, C2, or C3. C2 is specifically for Cleveland Avenue corridor, so the remaining categories are C1 and C3. And the recommendation is for C1 based on the previous slide in the context surrounding this property. There is a conditional use approved for development of the existing storage uses and office use. That conditional use approval does run with the land. It protects those existing uses under that conditional approval. And any change of ownership doesn't affect that approval. So the owner would be able to sell this property to another investor, another developer. They'd be able to continue those uses. If there's a desire to change those uses in the future, that owner could submit an application for a rezone to look at different use categories for that property based on the proposal that they might have for development. Just kind of order of operations. I'll go through the slide and let the board deliberate on this. I can cycle back to any of these slides if you'd like to look at the recommended options for the zoning categories, but you don't have to make a decision during the presentation. The focus area B, I feel like we got pretty good direction from the board at the last meeting on this particular property. It's at the corner of Garfield and West First Street. The context here was the property was identified during a planning commission work session. And the question was our parcel boundaries didn't actually match the ownership parcels. And so we cleaned that up. And in that process, we figured out, we didn't actually address what this property should be zoned because it was all grouped in with a different parcel. The planning commission looked at, it's owned by the same owner. That owner has contiguous parcels and they're all zoned agricultural. It seems to make sense that they would all be zoned ag since they're all same ownership and contiguous. And so that was the planning commission's recommendation. That is what's reflected on the draft map in your packet. The owner subsequently reached out to staff and came and spoke at the board public hearing and said, that's really not what he desires for that particular property. It's been zoned C1 for many years. It's had business uses in it. There was a desire to keep those business uses a viable option. And so the owner just requested, can you just leave it C1 as it's zoned today? There is existing C1 proposed across the street. There's adjacent, medium density residential. So that C1, seems like a good fit for that area in that context. And that would be the recommendation of staff. The planning commission obviously recommended agricultural, but they weren't presented with that same information because that came in after the planning commission's recommendation. So for the recommended options, C1 is the recommendation. I kind of felt like there was some consensus amongst the board for that, but we wanted to make sure we highlighted that since it came up as a discussion item. If that is a desire of the board, I'd recommend including in your motion regarding ordinance 3-2023 to specifically identify that change for this property, if that's the board's will. Focus area C, wish there was a way to hide that little bubble there. I don't know if I can move it. It's not going to work on the presentation there. So focus area C is along 6th Street. It's commonly referred to as the Timig property. This property is currently zoned transitional. Transitional's gone away. And so some new zoning designation is needed for this area. There are really 3 entities involved in this property. I've highlighted here in the boundary, the town and the Boys and Girls Club of Larimer County jointly own this property. And then Wellington Community Church owns the parcel just north of that. It's about 10 acres. The Boys and Girls Club in town jointly own about 17 acres. A couple months ago, or probably nearly a year ago, there was a presentation to the board in which all 3 of those entities had kind of identified that the desire collectively was to find a way to market this property and sell it, use the revenues to benefit the organizations and whatever their future pursuits might be. At the March 28th Board of Trustees meeting, representation from Boys and Girls Club spoke at that meeting and said that they really weren't sure if that was the right direction they wanted to go, that they might have some additional future uses that they think this site might be a viable option for. And so had expressed a desire to protect those additional options for their future. Staff took that as we need to figure out what's going on here, what the available options are. And so we reached back out to Boys and Girls Club last week and followed up again this week. I provided some additional information to them about our zoning code, and there's a definition for clubs and lodges, which has a pretty broad definition. I put that on the slide in your packet. In staff's opinion, that's a pretty broad definition and was intended to capture things of that nature, like a Boys and Girls Club, a Rotary Club, Kiwanis Club, VFW or American Legion. All those organizations seem to fit within this definition, and that is a use by right in the C3 zone district category. So it was staff's opinion that the C3 zoning does adequately protect those future expressed options that the Boys and Girls Club had presented. I did receive communication today from Mr. Pete Meyer, who had represented Boys and Girls Club, and his email response was simply, I think we'll be okay with C3. So I did get that, and Pete's not here tonight, but that was the email communication he sent to staff. So our recommendation is, especially based on Boys and Girls Club providing some feedback there, our recommendation is to stick with the C3 mixed use commercial zoning. As an alternative, I think a reasonable alternative to protect the Boys and Girls Club's desires was public. That would certainly change some considerations for the Wellington Community Church who have a desire to sell their property. I did speak with representation from Wellington Community Church, and Mr. Jason Swears is here tonight in attendance to kind of see how this conversation goes. But that conversation expressed the desire to keep the C3 zoning there. Focus area D. This property is commonly referred to as Tract F, maybe infamous at this point. It's in Columbine Estates on the south end of town. It's a 12.5 acre parcel. It's currently zoned P public. It's owned by the town, and the town is responsible for maintenance of this property. It serves as a stormwater detention pond. That pond was recently modified in a way to function differently than it was originally intended, and that activity is complete for those improvements. There's just some maintenance things that need to continue for that. But it is intended to be a stormwater pond. There's really no other intention or use for that property at this time. It does serve a pretty large regional stormwater basin that benefit from that, including multiple residential subdivisions and the commercial subdivisions to the north. So there's very little likelihood for this property use to change to anything. other than detention. The planning commission looked at all the townwide public parcels, and because this is only going to be stormwater, for stormwater detention, and because of the adjacency to the frontage road and I-25, the planning commission said that we think that C3 zoning makes sense here for consistency along that commercial corridor and along the frontage road. The comprehensive plan identifies that corridor along the frontage road as commercial. So it would make logical sense, or at least the planning commission recommended. I think it makes sense from a staff standpoint, that further south here, those additional properties as they annex into the town would become commercial along the frontage road as well. And this would provide that contiguity and consistency throughout that corridor. We do point out here some additional information that wasn't presented before, and I wanted to highlight that stormwater detention is protected. It will remain stormwater detention. There were some comments at the last public meeting that kind of questioned, well, what if that goes away? It's really not going to go away. This tract is platted as detention. It has a drainage easement, drainage access and utility easement platted across the entire property, so it's encumbered. The Board of Trustees would have to vacate the easements in order for something else to happen there, to allow something other than drainage for which it's protected. It is owned by the town. It's platted as a tract. Tracts are not developable unless the board were to replat it to something else. So there's all that points back to the Board of Trustees would have to make all of the approvals, multiple approvals to change the uses of this site. So the zoning is probably not a significant factor for how that site is going to be used. It was intended by the Planning Commission's recommendation to provide that continuity and consistency for the future land uses south of this area. And a lot of that is on the slide here that I just explained. I probably should have advanced that slide. So there it is. And so the recommendation is the C3 mixed use commercial. The alternative, just again, trying to keep it simple, industrial and residential didn't really make a lot of sense for this area. So C3 mixed use or P public district is what it's currently zoned. So effectively that would just be doing nothing with this parcel. So those were the kind of the two options that we narrowed it down to as a staff recommendation. Focus area E. I didn't hear a lot of board direction on this particular property in the March 28th meeting, but we did hear some questions about it. And so what I've attempted to do with these slides is just provide some of that background and context. This area is currently zone transitional, and the transitional zone district no longer exists in the land use code. So some new zoning is needed. The properties in this block currently consist of some residential properties, some are residential owned, some are residential rented. There are a variety of residential construction methods there. There's also existing businesses. There used to be Randy's Tire Shop. That's now a landscape business. Wish Landscaping had an office here in the past, and there's self-storage uses adjacent here. So it's definitely an area in transition. And along this corridor, along Highway 1, the transition has been more towards business uses. And so in the Planning Commission's considerations and recommendation, there was a lot of discussion about Highway 1 being a commercial corridor that probably needs to be C3 to allow that range of uses for that particular corridor. But then there's residential uses nearby this property. And so stepping down in commercial categories seemed to make sense here. And this block was recommended for the C1 community commercial because of its adjacency to both residential and a higher intensity commercial use. I probably just covered those. There's a variety of residential uses adjacent to this site and within the site, and becoming more commercial just based on the last couple of requests for this area. So a couple of things to point out here. Since the transitional zoning no longer exists, for this block, zoning this block commercial would make the residential uses non-conforming, but the same is true in the alternative as well. Zoning it residential would make the commercial uses non-conforming. And the do nothing option leaves them all non-conforming. Those questions came up about non-conforming uses in the last meeting. And I wanted to kind of put some context to this, that this is a very unique area in the mix of uses that are there. And so there's no way around the non-conforming conversation. because of the questions that have been asked about non-conforming uses and non-conforming structures, I also included that section from the land use code in your agenda packet. So you had that easily accessible to familiarize yourselves with those provisions. The non-conforming provisions of the land use code apply generally to the entire town. Every property in town, that same language applies to it if the property becomes non-conforming for the use or the structures. So just some highlights from that. Legal uses or structures that are existing on the day that the non-conformity becomes a result as a result of a land use change in the code or the zoning of that property are protected. They're allowed to continue as long as they maintain that use. Change of ownership, change of tenants occupying the space, or change of management company, managing those spaces, none of those affect the non-conforming status. The non-conforming status is protected as long as that's being used that way. Repair and maintenance of a non-conforming use and structure is allowed. We've heard some misinformation that wouldn't be allowed, and that's not true. If there's hail damage to those structures, they can repair those structures, even though it's a non-conforming structure or non-conforming use. So there are a lot of protections baked into that Article 7 for the non-conformities. One of the things that is a little bit limiting is that non-conforming uses cannot be expanded. So if you have a non-conforming use like a residential home in a commercial district, you can't expand that to be a duplex because that's increasing the degree of non-conformity, and you can't worsen the conditions for the non-conforming use. So that's what that means by expansion, and that's more detailed in the text of the code that I provided in the packet. Non-conforming structures can be expanded as long as the expansion does not increase the degree of non-conformity. So if the structure is non-conforming because it doesn't meet a setback requirement, say if the setback requirement is 25 feet and the structure is at 20 feet, you can still expand that structure. You'd have to expand it to the rear or the side, or you can add a porch or some other architectural element to it. You just can't increase the degree of non-conformity, so you can't expand it further into the setback because that would make the condition worse. So there are broad protections for those non-conforming uses and non-conforming structures. This next slide focuses on the question of what happens if there's damage to a non-conforming structure. And there's no way around it. That situation could exist anywhere in town where there's a non-conforming use, or any city in the country where there's a non-conforming use. This language is not unique to Wellington. The 50% threshold is a widely used metric. The reason why that metric is in the code is because it creates clarity. If it weren't in there, then if something were to happen to a structure, there'd be a lot of questions. What do we do? What can we do? Do we have to get approval for that, or can we just do it? It provides clarity for what to do in those situations. So these bullets kind of highlight those thresholds. If a non-conforming use or structure is damaged to less than 50% defined as fair market value, then that structure is allowed to remain and can be repaired and maintained to bring it back into operating condition. As long as that second caveat, as long as the repair and maintenance doesn't expand the nonconformity. So you can replace the siding, you can replace the windows, replace the roofs. You can repair the structure structurally. If it becomes structurally deficient because a truck runs into it, you can repair it, you can make it right. You just can't use the repair as a way to add a whole other room to a non-conforming structure. And the second part here is if a non-conforming use or structure is damaged more than 50%, it can only be repaired in conformance with the district regulations in place at that time. So that, I think, is the biggest kind of concern that has been brought up is, well, what if that structure burns to the ground? You know, the reality is those are what if scenarios because it hasn't happened yet. When that situation happens, and these are my last two bullets, if those situations happen, when they happen, those circumstances have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. Even though this language is written broadly to apply to all properties in town, you can't apply the same set of circumstances to every single property because the circumstances are different. What's going on with that structure? What made it non-conforming? Was it damaged as a result of nature? Is it covered by insurance or not? A lot of times that 50% threshold is a trigger for insurance companies to make a determination on whether they're going to cover it full replacement cost or whether they're just going to pay out for the damages and let the owner decide what they want to do with that property next. Again, it creates clarity for what to do in those circumstances. If a situation with a non-conforming use being damaged does come up, there are protections built into the code. There's a number of procedures or applications that would be viable for a property to pursue in those instances, including if it's a non-conforming structure because it violates a setback, that owner could obtain a variance from the Board of Adjustments to build that structure back and reduce that setback requirement to build it back where it was before. That's a procedure I didn't include all of the application processes, but that's in the land use code. It may be eligible for a conditional use depending on the zoning of that property. So that's another public hearing process that the planning commission weighs in on, the board makes the final decision. That's an alternative that may be available for some properties. Any property owner can also request a rezone, meaning I had this structure there, it's non-conforming and it's been damaged or destroyed, and I'd like to build it back, but the zoning doesn't allow it. I'd like to request to have that property zoned a different zoning category so I can rebuild that existing use. And that would go through the processes and board approval. And I'm going to throw one in there that I didn't put on this slide deck because I think it's important. There's also an appeal process. If a structure were damaged, or if a non-conforming use or structure were damaged, the town staff would have to make a determination on what was the fair market value, what is the percent of damage, usually that's based on a fire district report for a damaged structure or a structural engineer's opinion. So what was the fair market value? What was the percent of damage? And then the town staff would make a determination. It can be rebuilt or it cannot be rebuilt. If the determination was it cannot be rebuilt, the applicant or the owner would have the option to appeal that decision and present additional testimony where the Board of Adjustments would have the right to make a different determination based on the evidence presented to it. So that appeal process can only take place after a circumstance comes up where we'd have to look at a case-by-case basis. And if all else fails and the applicant or owner comes to the town board and says, my gosh, we've worked with planning staff and there's not any available alternatives, but we still really want to do this, would you consider making amendments to your code to write a different provision that allows us to move forward? That is still within this board's prerogative to consider those options on a case-by-case basis. So with that background and context, and probably more information than you wanted on non-conforming uses, something has to be done for the zoning here because residential would make commercial non-conforming, commercial would make residential non-conforming, and the do nothing option isn't really an option because it doesn't do anything except make them all non-conforming. Staff's recommendation is to stick with the C1 zoning that was recommended by the Planning Commission. As a second alternative, staff put out there, R3 might make the best second alternative, but I really don't think it's a good alternative. It just really doesn't fit the bill for what's there or what's intended to be there. So we're really strongly recommending the C1 for that one. So those are my presentation slides. The final slide here concludes with just a copy of the draft zoning map that's proposed for adoption. And at this point, the board can deliberate. I'm happy to respond to any questions that you might have. There is an ordinance in your packet that is based on this official zoning map. I think at the minimum, I think there was a kind of guidance from the board to rezone the property at Washington or at Garfield and West First Street, the focus area B to C1. And so that would need to be reflected in an amended motion.
Thank you. Start with Mayor Pro Tem. No questions. Trustee Wiegand, or yeah.
Just a quick question, on E. So if we go C1, all the modular homes, all the, mobile homes over there would be all non-conforming to the C1, correct?
Yes, if the C1 is selected, the residential structures would become non-conforming uses.
Okay. Also too, got a question. You said we cannot make it any more non-conforming. If one of the people over there, the residents over there wanted to put up a garage that's not crowding any type of a setback or anything like that, would that still be feasible for them?
My opinion, looking at this, and I didn't mention it, but I did speak with two of the property owners in this area about that specific question. And my opinion is yes, a detached garage could be added if it meets all the setbacks. It's not changing the use of the property. It's still, if it's a residential property, adding a garage, the use is still residential. Adding the structure doesn't change the degree of nonconformity. It's a garage that supports the structure, the residential use. So they just have to comply with the building code and the setbacks for that property, and they'd be able to add a detached structure.
Okay, cool. And last question, and this is on, I think, D. And I understand why you're doing it, the continuity of that. And I presume that we'll never put any limitations on that property down there, the holding basin down there. And I just hate seeing that happen, but that we're bending over backwards to make it easier for different things to get approved down the road. But I can see why you're doing it, and yeah. I think, yes, that's everything I got. Thank you.
Trustee Teets.
All right. So the only issues I have from an understanding of the focus area A is understandably C1 community. The focus area B, we agreed on that one the last time, so it was an understanding that that was at property owner's request. Focus area C, I don't have any issues with, as long as it supports what the boys and girls could possibly do moving forward. Focus area D, I don't have any issue with because it remains consistent with the rest of the map that has been laid out. I also have to point out, this is the pond that had the massive E. coli outbreak this last summer. So if there is ever any water in there, I hope people are not taking their dogs and running around down there. Please don't. Because you never know when that could pop back up again. The issue I have, and this is the same issue I had this last time, is focus area E. My issue with this is when you look at taking people that have owned these properties for an extended period of time and you transition them without giving them a protection to what their personal property rights are as it sits now. Yes, it transitions conforming residents to a non-conforming residence under C1. They do have possibility to do things, but it's at somebody's discretion. And that's what bothers me the most in this entire conversation. Is one of the most important things is personal property rights. And part of that personal property right, in the way that I look at it, is, you know, if you're going through these zoning plans and you're going to change the idea of what someone's resident is that lives there and has possibly lived there for many years, owned that property for many years, if there is something we can do to do as what we did when I spoke last time, like the religious land use and the protections of C2 downtown district for partial residential homes, or if someone wanted to open a business, I would be comfortable with approving this and voting yes, if we could add something in that has the conversation of, with the understanding that we would address this land use code issue at this date and time. So making sure that, one, we're understanding the planning commission has looked through all of this and given in-depth thought, but two, understanding that we still have to understand where residents and business owners are coming from that live on those properties. I don't want them to have to pay a $1,000 application for a variance. I don't want to see them come back to us and ask permission to use their property the way they want to utilize it. So I'm comfortable if that is something we can look at for that focus area E.
Is there anybody that can answer that? Well, I wanted to see if we could get an answer for that. Yeah, clarification on if that's.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing Trustee Teets say is that there's maybe a desire to take a look at amending the text of the land use code. And that's certainly an option of the board to take that up at a future date. That's not part of the consideration tonight. I just want to make that clear that we understand what you're saying in terms of taking a look at that. that'd have to be a future effort and a future action by the board.
Right. No, what I was asking is adding it in an amendment saying that we will address it at this date and time.
So if we make a motion, you want that stated in the, is that what you're asking?
That we could address it at this date and this time.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think an amendment to the land use code would have to go through, the first step in that process is to go through the planning commission. So I think it would be very, at a minimum, it would be very challenging to set a, I think it, am I correct on the land use code
It does
amendment
go through-
process?
It does go through planning commission first, but it can be initiated by the board.
Oh,
So yes,
absolutely.
we don't start with it, but we can initiate the process. It goes through like planning, then comes back to us.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. It can be initiated here, but the first step in, the first consideration really is through the planning commission, which then provides a recommendation to the board of trustees. So I think trying to set a date certain that it will be back in front of the board of trustees would be very, very challenging. I think if the board wants that issue to be readdressed, I would want to look at the planning commission's calendar. But it would be doable.
We understand the intent, and I also don't think you want to conditionally approve your zoning map that's an official legal document of the town. If that condition weren't satisfied due to scheduling or staffing availability or some other reason, it could invalidate the entire approval of your zoning map. So I don't recommend doing that, but we certainly understand the desire to bring it back and have that discussion at a later date.
Thank you. Trustee Gaiter?
All right. So I will try to go through these quickly. So area A, I would agree with keeping that as the C1. Area B, I agree with going to C1 on that one. Especially as it's zoned that. Focus area C, I think that keeping that as C3 for the time being, and then just if we need to have conversations with Boys and Girls Club, especially since we own the property, if we need to redo zoning later, I would like to make sure, it sounds like you've already got it clarified, but if we can just double check and make 100% sure they would be allowed to use it under C3, that would be great, just because that puts it all to bed. But I would say for now, leave it C3 and readdress later as needed. Focus area D. So my only issue, and thank you for clarifying that the whole of tract F is under the words easement, thank you. So that it can't be used, because that was a question I had. The issue that I have, and it's not just with tract F, it's with all of the other ones, and I understand the thought process the planning commission went through of just zoning it as adjacent, is that what it does is it makes it look like we have more of zoning that can't be used for that. So for example, if you look at the zoning map and you're looking to develop in Wellington, you're like, oh, look, there's this C3 commercial, you drive up I-25, you're like, oh, it's empty, let me look in, and then find out, oh, you can't do anything. And then same thing with some of the residential ones. So it's like some are being zoned as residential, some are being zoned as commercial, but you can't actually put that use on the property because it has this easement or it's for drainage. So my preference would not just for tract F, but just if it literally cannot be used for anything other than the drainage or what we have on it, leave that as public. Don't zone it as commercial, because then we end up having places on our map that actually cannot be used for that use. So it says C3 can't be used for C3. It says residential can't be used for residential, it says C1. So that's my concern with that. It's not just tract F, it's with all of the ones that have been rezoned to kind of, I understand the logic behind it, but the problem is then it puts things on our zoning map that we really can't do. And now maybe some of the other areas you could build uses on it. I don't know all the other ones. So that's my thought on that, is I'd really prefer that not only tract F stay P public, but the other drainage areas, especially those owned by the town, that those remain as P public and not be rezoned to match the adjacent. So that's focus area D. E, I would agree with keeping it as C1 community commercial. I have no problem with readdressing land use code. But I mean, either way, even if we zone it as residential, we're now going to have commercial uses that are going to be in that route where if their business were to burn to the ground, they couldn't rebuild. So it's not like if we zone it residential. And so we've kind of got two sides of that. And we do have a process. I'd be totally open. I have no problem giving protections to other zoning that we have in C2. So I would be open to doing that, but I'm fine with that remaining as C1. Hey, I made it all the way through.
Record time. All right, Trustee Daly.
Okay, the first thing I wanted to state is that since we were talking about the zoning map versus land use code, that we should keep those separate. I think that's already been acknowledged. for focus area A, I think there's a big confusion here. I think the concern is that they're changing from one commercial to another, but that's not the case. Right now, well, what doesn't exist is they're transitional. And what transitional means is nothing's permitted. Every single use for that property has to have a conditional use. So right now, as it was, or as it was before in our land use code, no uses were allowed. So the fact that they got the conditional use is what allows them to have that business. So no other uses were allowed at that point. So there's nothing being taken away because nothing was being allowed, only what they received their conditional use for. So I think changing it to C1 makes sense for its location, and for many of the other things. And I think we heard about 4 other viable options for that landowner if they ever wanted to expand on or replace their non-conditional use. Or I'm sorry, if they wanted to rebuild based on that 50% rule or any of those options. So it sounds like to me that's covered. Nothing's being taken away. It's just switching to more uses really. And their conditional use still exists on that property, regardless of new ownership or anything, as we mentioned earlier. So it's actually expanding the options of use on that property. Otherwise, everything else I agree with as listed on the map, with the exception of B, going to C1 from agriculture. I think that does need to change. I realize and understand that the consistent process to change public zoning across the entire town was done with methodology to be consistent. It wasn't done for one specific property. It was done for multiple across the entire town to apply that methodology across the entire town. For that reason, I think we need to uphold that consideration from the Planning Commission. And I know that I feel like extensive work went into that. And also it's a corridor along a frontage road. In no way should we ever allow low density residential or any zoning be along a frontage road. That should not be allowed. And it has happened in the past. And I think that was a mistake. And I don't think we should ever allow that in the future. So we should ensure everything along a frontage road or that type of high traffic corridor would never be like a low residential in general. So I would be happy moving forward with the ordinance as listed, with the exception of the change to 3530 Garfield Avenue to C1.
Thank you. Trustee Mason.
No questions.
I'm good. May I get a motion in a second.
So let's see. So I guess we need a motion in a second prior to doing amendments, correct? So we need a motion second first, and then we need to do amendments. Because at least in some of these, we have several adjustments that need to be made. So for example, area A does not need to be changed, so that can stay as C1, but area B would need to be adjusted. If we agree that that needs to be adjusted, that needs to go to C1 from agricultural, which is currently proposed. C does not need any change because that will be remaining. Again, D, whether that's remaining, if that's remaining, there's no need change needed. And then
It would go.
so
it would
really
go
it's
forward
just
as a motion with note of B going to C1.
Yeah, with one amendment.
Okay. I just didn't know if that needed to be a separate amendment or just part of the main motion.
It's a second recommended one. Yeah.
Is there- The second one is you can move to approve the ordinance with that change. That would be a motion.
Got it. Thank you.
Can we restate the motion, please?
Oh, we haven't had one yet.
Okay. I wasn't sure if John was going for it or what was happening over there.
Okay.
Okay, that's you.
I move to approve ordinance number 03-2023 with the amendments to the property 3530 Garfield Avenue to change the zoning to C1.
I'll second.
Can I get a roll call, please?
Certainly. Trustee Daly,
Yes.
trustee Mason,
Yes.
trustee Gaiter,
No.
trustee Teets,
No.
trustee Wiegand,
No.
Mayor Pro Tem McDonald,
Yes.
Mayor Chaussee.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time, board.
Thank you. All right, the next item on the agenda will be E2, a resolution in opposition to statewide land use and zoning preemptions in the Senate Bill 23-20 or 213. Patti Garcia, Town Administrator, will present this item. Ms. Garcia.
Thank you, Mayor and Trustees. So, oops, there goes one of our signs. We've got to get a better way to put that up. We'll take care of that during the next week or two. So during the legislative session, we do get requests from the Colorado Municipal League to support or oppose various bills. Generally, they don't have anything to do with Wellington. They're on a much larger scale. They affect larger municipalities, the city of Aurora, city of Colorado Springs, things like that. This particular bill, and why I brought it before you, is one that infringes on local government control. It's a lengthy bill. It's full of inconsistencies. If you read through it, I sent you with the information from CML, their PowerPoint, their analysis, and it's something that even at this point, this particular bill would not affect Wellington. But at the same time, we know how legislation occasionally works, and it starts maybe hitting your larger municipalities and then trickles down to the smaller municipalities. Wellington and its residents have worked hard over the last several years on the comprehensive plan, on their strategic plan, to make sure that communities being created that is one that the residents support. And I wanted to make sure, and whether the Board of Trustees approves the opposition or not, I wanted to make sure the Board of Trustees had the opportunity to voice whether they supported or opposed the bill or not. If it does get supported, it will get sent, the resolution will get sent to the Colorado Municipal League so that they are aware of your stand. So it's one of those things, as far as the local government control, is near and dear to my heart. And I just want to make sure that the town of Wellington has that opportunity to voice their thoughts on that.
Thank you.
I have one more thing I forgot.
Oh.
So the bill was heard. The Senate Local Government and Housing Committee heard the bill last Thursday. The bill sponsor, Majority Leader Dominic Marino, did provide some amendments, potential amendments. CML has not seen those amendments yet. They don't know if they'll see them by the end of the week or not. But a lot of municipalities last night and tonight are going through the same actions with their trustees or their council.
Thank you for that. Start with Trustee Mason.
No, I don't think Wellington should be in support of this. Just coming from part of the CML document, this bill dramatically expands state authority by imposing top-down zoning and land use standards on municipalities, and it puts those decisions into the hands of the developer interests rather than an unelected third party. So, no, I don't stand for this, and certainly when it comes to municipal control, that needs to be placed right here in our hands here in the town of Wellington. So,
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
I support this resolution and local control.
Thank you. Trustee Wiegand.
Amen. Same as hers. Support the resolution and we need to keep it here.
Perfect. Trustee Teets.
I also support this resolution. I think that what's good for Wellington is not good for Longmont. What's good for Longmont is not good for Denver. So we definitely need to make sure that we're keeping the people's voice local and not relying on states to decide that decision for us.
Perfect. Thank you. Trustee Gaiter.
So yeah, I'd be in agreement with my colleagues. I think that we really have worked hard in Wellington to try and say, how can we move forward and improve things and do better? I think our last board and this board, especially that I've been a part of, have really worked hard to say, what is our identity, and make very clear, like, our identity is not We're not North Fort Collins. We're not Boulder. We're not all these other places. And I think that that really needs to stay with our local, with our planning commission, with our board of trustees. Our residents here in our town need to be that voice that goes over it. I know there's a lot of things in there that talk about affordable housing and different things, and those all sound really good. And I think that there's been a lot of consensus locally that yes, we should work on those things. But I think it's something that we should be doing that because we as a community feel that's important, not because the state of Colorado says, hey, we think that you need to focus on this, because they're not here. They're not talking to our residents. They're not sitting here and answering to those residents on it. You know, when they're not walking into the grocery store at Ridley's and having residents say, John, why did you do this? Right? You know, they're not ever going to talk to these people. And I think that that ability to say, hey, we're doing this for good or bad, right? When I mess something up, people should be able to walk up to me or come to my house and say, what were you thinking? To have that accountability. So I think that this needs to remain here locally. And I agree that we should add our voice to say, hey, this is, please allow us to be that local government here.
Thank you. Trustee Daly?
I would prefer people didn't come to my house, but I would be happy to meet with the people otherwise, but just to make that clear. I got to participate and witness the process of putting the land use code together and the comprehensive plan, and got to see how much public outreach was involved in that. The surveys, the open houses, town halls, steering committee, focus groups. There was so much input from very interested parties who would be immediately affected as community members within our town. And every single sentence of that entire comprehensive plan and land use code was derived from that feedback of our residents. We have to protect that. Wellington is ours, and we've been making it ours and trying to bring our community and make it exactly as our community wants and head into that direction. And for that reason, we need to keep control of those items.
Thank you. Yeah, all forward. Good with it. Everybody said my piece. So. Good there. May I get a motion to second on this? Oh, yeah. Make a public comment on this. You even told me, I know.
Once again, Lisa Chaussee. Wanted to provide a little more context for our residents on this particular bill. I've had the opportunity to sit in and participate in quite a few different listening sessions with some of the local legislators that represent us. Well, actually, that don't represent us here in Wellington, but work in the state capitol. And hear input from a lot of different communities, including rural communities. The background on this is that the bill sponsor worked with SWEEP, which is Southwest Energy Efficiency Project. And so a lot of it is geared around affordable housing and transportation and climate change and, working on our environment, and individually standing. All of those things are great things, right? We want affordable housing and things like that. But I'm going to contradict you a little bit, Patti, because in this wording, non-urban municipalities are included on a few of these guidelines, and that is us. Those are outside of the MPO, which we would all like to be in an MPO. That's more money for us, and have more than 5,000 people. And things that I personally found concerning were, no, I lost it. Hold on. In their table for non-urban municipalities, we would be required to allow accessory dwelling units. And we would be required to remove minimum lot sizes, which would affect our setbacks that we struggle and fight with, or, that we want to have here. And we would be required to meet some of the strategic growth and planning and water efficiency things, a lot of things that we've spent a lot of time and money on already. And of course, the local control and all of that. But all of that to say, I think it's important that you guys pass this resolution, but I think it's equally, if not even more important, that as individuals that also happen to sit on this board, and as residents, those sitting here and those are maybe listening at home, you need to email the people that do represent us down in the state which is Minority Leader Representative Mike Lynch. He has a Facebook page. You can Google it. They'll send you right to his email. And then Senator Janice Marchman. And again, all of their information is easily accessible to send emails and things like that. But I think it's important because those individuals also represent at least one municipality that does support this resolution. And so I think it's important that they hear from their constituents how much this isn't a good thing for our town, because it will cost us money, it will take away our choices, it will take away our control. And ultimately, this is built around the Denver metro area, which was demonstrated time and time again by every presentation that I watched. And we're not in Denver, we're nowhere near Denver. So with all that, I just wanted to really stress the importance of civic involvement from everyone to reach out to the people that actually vote. Thank you.
Thank you.
And to clarify, yes, there are some areas in this that do affect Wellington, but overall, it's 105 pages of information. And it's really going to hit our larger municipalities. It's really going to hurt them. So yes, there are some areas that will affect that if it gets passed as is, could affect Wellington.
Thank you.
You bet.
Going once. Going twice. Public comments sold. Any final comments from the board? All right, motion and a second.
Please flip over to the other page.
I'll make a motion that we approve resolution number 16-2023, a resolution of the town of Wellington in opposition to statewide land use and zoning preemptions in the Senate Bill 23-213.
I'll second.
Hearing no further comments, may I get a roll call, please?
Certainly. Trustee Mason. Yes. Trustee Teets.
Yes.
Trustee Wiegand.
Yes.
Trustee Daly.
Yes.
Trustee Gaiter.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem McDonald.
Yes.
Mayor Chaussee.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On to reports, town attorney, Mr. Sapienza.
No updates at this time.
Thank you. Town administrator, Ms. Garcia.
All right, for your meeting next week, it's a work session. We'll be talking about the marijuana sales tax, off-road vehicles, enforcement of irrigation restrictions. We'll have a flock camera presentation from LCSO and a monthly utility report. You also may have seen on Facebook or in social media that we'll be closing all of our town facilities on April 13th from 12 to 1:30. We are holding an all-employee meeting. So we try to do that quarterly, and we'll get together for lunch and just do some presentations and shout outs to some really great employees. So wanted to let you know that was the purpose of that.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Core report, first quarter. Mr. Muhs.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the board. I'm Ethan Muhs, Town Clerk. In your packet, you have the official core report for the first quarter. We had 24 total requests. You can see a summary detailing what each of those requests included. I'm happy to take any questions, and there are additional stats at the bottom of that document. Key to highlight is that there were 3 requests that took us past the first hour of free staff time, at which point we issued invoices. 2 of which currently we have collected, or we have collected fees for. The other one resulted in basically an abandoned core request. Very happy to take any questions that you have on this report.
Any questions?
I appreciate, I talk all the time about transparency and the need for that. So I appreciate the great work that you guys do as staff, is making sure that when our residents have questions about how we as government operate, you're doing a great job of getting that information. So appreciate the work, guys.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
On to board reports, we will also keep these to 3 minutes.
Lot.
Oh. What am I doing?
You're ready to go.
Yeah,
I
I'm
know.
anxious to get out of here.
I know. That betting. Next will be the first quarter residential building permit lot inventory report. Mr. Byrd.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll keep this quick, but I did want to, can I be promoted to share screen again?
You're still a talent.
It's not allowing me to share screen. Oh, it's because you're sharing the timer. There we go. Thank you. So I think it was important to get these up here just for the graphics that were in the agenda packet. What I provided to the board tonight is a kind of a first quarter report on our residential building permit activities for the town. Residential permit activities are a pretty solid indicator of community growth, change, and economic vitality, as well as a way of predicting our future budget revenues and our future housing needs and supply and demand functions. So this first slide I wanted to share with you is just this is maybe a little bit bigger, would help. This first graphic here is showing the residential unit permits issued in 2023. You can see that number is fairly low at only 17. A lot of people comment how fast Wellington's growing, and from a residential activity standpoint, we really are not seeing that growth in the current year. We continue to see housing demand, but market volatility, mortgage insurance or mortgage interest rates being up and down has kind of caused consumer confidence to be a little bit low, and kind of holding out and waiting. A lot of our builders during that period of mortgage interest rate fluctuation had a lot of permits that were already issued in their supply reservoir that they're still working on selling those units. And so they haven't been doing new construction starts until they replenish their inventory of existing homes. So those are some of the factors why we're seeing those permit numbers be a little low in 2023. As I scroll down to the next page, this is something that town staff tracks kind of continuously, and we can report on this at any point in time it's needed, but we're trying to do this quarterly to inform the Planning Commission and the Board of Trustees on our activities from a residential construction standpoint. But this table is showing the kind of the trend line over time. These are residential single-family attached units that have been permitted from 2009 to 2023. This 2023 year is a projection year. We anticipated 80 residential permits being issued this year. Some of that was also tied to capacity limitations of our water and wastewater treatment facilities. So we intentionally have tried to manage that growth of residential units to stay within our treatment abilities for those plants. You see the monthly reports from Public Works on water and wastewater, and we've been able to manage that very effectively. Then these are future years. These are projections based on expected residential housing demand, market viability, and servicing our debt service on our community loans for water and wastewater treatment plants based on the impact fees collected that pay for those plant expansions. The next chart here is attached units and multifamily units. You can see there were a few years where there was an increase in the number of multifamily and attached units, and that has declined over the last couple of years. We don't currently have any projects approved or in the pipeline for any multifamily or attached units, which largely is where some of our affordable housing options come from. So that's a pretty strong indicator that there's a gap in the housing market, and we'll need to work to fill that in future years. And the last chart here is showing the cumulative totals for residential units. This peak in 2016 is at a time when areas east of the highway were developing, including the apartments there. There was a pretty large influx of permits during that year to address that building out a subdivision. And then you see another peak here in 2020. And that was a peak as it was the back end of permits being issued for a couple of subdivisions that were kind of reaching build out, or at least from a permit issuance standpoint. There was also a change in the raw water dedication requirements at that time. And so there was a pretty large influx of permits issued to get in front of the change that the town was making for water and raw water contributions. And then you see our current years being a little bit lower as those projects are being built out and the current housing market slow down a little bit. And then this last slide, this is by subdivision, the number of units that are currently available and ready for permit issuance. we track this in live time. We update this frequently to make sure we understand where our available units are. The bottom line here is the part that's interesting. There are currently only 54 lots in town that are available to issue a building permit for. And remember that the previous slide, we projected 80 for the year for budgetary purposes. So there's a gap between the number of permits that we can issue for buildable lots and what we projected. Many of you may have seen Sage Homes' second subdivision along Highway 1. Developer has begun mass grading the site there to prepare for installation of public improvements, water lines, sewer lines, roads. Those projects take a little bit of time, but we would anticipate lots being available in that subdivision by maybe fall this year to issue permits. So that will help. There's only 103 lots in that subdivision. And so 54 existing plus 103 covers this year's projections, but it doesn't cover next year's. So there's additional projects needed to meet our projected revenues from tap fees for residential. The other key indicator that we're tracking here is the number of platted lots. That's lots that have gone through the subdivision process and are approved and entitled for development. They would still require public infrastructure being installed before we could issue permits. But we do have 627 lots within the town limits that are platted and approved for residential construction. If you do the math on those and looking at the previous slide, the town has projected 150 permits next year, 180 permits the year after that, and 200 in future years from a revenue and budgeting standpoint. That 627 platted lots is a 3-year supply. And we've had word from some of those developers and owners of those properties that they don't intend to build within that time frame. So there's another gap for future years to kind of keep pace with what we had projected for revenues from new residential construction. So we do track these things. We keep a close eye on them. We work closely with our development communities to try to manage this smart growth philosophy to make sure we're within our water and wastewater treatment capacities and still keep a healthy inventory of available lots to meet those budgetary needs of the town. I'd be happy to answer any questions from the board on this report.
Thank you. Trustee Daly.
I'm concerned. I don't have any questions. I'm just very, very concerned because without healthy growth, it's a financial concern for the entire town. So I guess my question is, how can we encourage more of the multifamily type development? Is there any methodology or anything we can do to recruit developers specifically for that purpose, both for affordable housing and for the other, impact related fees needs? So do you have any recommendations or how can we help? I'm just very concerned. I mean, everybody's doing a great job. We just need more. So I'm wondering how we can help, I guess.
I think for the multifamily and I'll call it mixed densities because attached single family is not traditionally a multifamily project, but it does help fill a need in the community. Yeah. And so we are talking with a couple of our builders to see if those types of projects would be enticing for them for either in existing subdivisions or we are considering there's a possibility for additional annexations in the town. Our comprehensive plan effort and future land use map identifies areas that are currently outside the town that may be brought in for future development and identifies kind of some of what the preferred densities of those development projects might look like. So the combination of the comp plan, land use code and zoning map do point a lot of that direction as to where those types of projects might be located. And we are talking with developers to see if they're interested in those missing middle type of housing products.
Thank you so much for your effort on that.
Thank you.
Trustee Gaiter.
So I had to agree with Trustee Daly that is concerning, just looking at the numbers. I know something I've talked a little bit with Ms. Garcia about is trying to set up a time for me to chat with maybe either Mr. Bird or some of our developers, but maybe what a good idea would do is whether it's a special meeting or a work session is to set up a time where we as a board can sit down with some of the developers and just find out, you know, especially if they're going to build, you know, they're finishing projects here and then moving on to another area, what are some of the things behind that? And just kind of have more of a dialogue, right, back and forth, and just to get some ideas, because we're trying to balance, I think, right, multiple sides where we're trying to say growth needs to pay its own way. That obviously does make it more expensive to build. But maybe if we could have that dialogue to just understand in a public meeting, whether like a work session or something, so we're not actually, but getting some of that feedback from the developers, just like, okay, and then we can have that discussion with staff is, are there adjustments that would match with our desire to make sure that we continue to have growth pay its way, but also make the process somewhat easier or desirable that builders maybe aren't finishing projects here and then moving to other municipalities. So I don't know if that's something we can figure out. I don't know how that would work or things like that, but maybe that might be a way to have those conversations to figure out what things can we do.
I don't really think it's got, you know, the information that you're sharing is, I don't think any reason to panic at this point in time. Development, it's 2 or 3 years behind. So by not panicking and just being proactive about acknowledging the situation and what we can do to try and invest in, you know, multifamily and that sort of situation, I think is best. But I don't want people to be alarmed that we're driving away development. We did this intentionally right now to meet the needs of the water treatment plant, the wastewater treatment plant. So I believe that as we get closer to that opening date, they're going to start looking at how much, you know, they're going to they can compare and contrast impact fees and development fees for surrounding communities. That's one thing that they look at. And then we have to talk about, you know, are we willing to do tax breaks? Because we're not willing to really waive our impact fees, but we could talk about, I think I would be interested in knowing more about what tax break opportunities are available to incentivize development. And then opening up the opportunity for conversation about the ADUs and what does that look like and what are the impacts to the community.
Thank you. Trustee Teets?
So I think that it is incredibly expensive to build in general right now. When you look at the cost of materials, you look at the additional prices on permitting and development fees. These developers are more in a sit and wait and see stage of planning. And I will say that as costs rise, developers tend to move on to areas that have those lower costs, lower fees, because they are in the business to make money. So I'm not opposed to finding out more about seeing what we can do to incentivize businesses to build here. What I would really like to see, and I know this is a question I had asked Patti before, I would love to see the availability of commercial build out lots. Like how many actual commercial lots do we have available for building without infrastructure, with infrastructure? Because that's one of the things that we also have to look at is if we aren't going to be pulling in funds from, say, roofs over residents' heads, can we look at an increased sales tax to help account for until that is built and our water plant development is getting back on track with interest rates the way they are? It's not going to be booming until interest rates do come back down. And all we see is that inflation going up. So what else can we do as a town proactively to support commercial development? And how many lots do we actually have? Like, that's something that I haven't had answered that I think would be a great thing to look at, is to see what that availability is. Kind of like this report, but more of a commercial and mixed use kind of thing.
Thank you. Trustee Wiegand?
I agree with John. I think we should talk with the builders out there, just kind of see where they're at, limiting factors for them. As long as we got high interest rates, as long as we got inflation that's out of control right now, you know, it's going to hurt our building. And I've come from an area where back in the 70s, I mean, it bankrupted a lot of builders back then. So, I mean, this is not new. It's just one of the cycles that you go through. But I think too, we need to be proactive, again, talking with the builders, plus talking with with commercial people. I mean, like Trustee Teets was saying, I mean, that definitely can fill in some of the impact that we're going to be taking as far as money coming in. So I think it's multifaceted how we should look at it. and get a plan. Thank you.
No comment. Sounds like maybe a work session of sorts to kind of go over this would be beneficial.
We'll talk about it. We also have our plan, our map here that shows our available lots and things like that. So I'll get with Cody and we'll come up with an idea.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, now we're on to board reports. Only one fumble. Trustee Wiegand. No report. Mayor Pro Tem. No report. Trustee Mason.
Yeah, I did just want to make a few quick comments, specifically in regard to the zoning map item earlier. And I did want to quickly reach out and thank the Planning Commission certainly for the countless hours that those guys put in, putting that all together, and for staff getting all those notifications out to residents. I was a little confused by the vote tonight because quite frankly, I thought we were a lot closer together than it turned out. But I did just want to give some folks my rationale on that really quickly. As far as Tract F goes, I did have the opportunity to go out and drive that property on Saturday. And quite frankly, doing my assessment out there, it seemed to me that that was not going to be something that we could zone public. And as far as a reference that I had made 2 weeks ago in the March 28th meeting, there was another property that was identified as A18 on page 79 of that map. Again, I think what we're doing here with Tract F would be consistent with what we've done with A18 at this point. And certainly after having an opportunity to walk that property, I think that made a lot of sense. So I'm just a little confused by the vote tonight, but again, here we are. So.
Thank you. Trustee Daly.
We received a response to our memo from the solid waste questions and items that we have, still digesting that. So I think that's going to take a little while. There was a lot of content in there, of course, and like a document that has 2,000 pages or so as an attachment. So we're going to be working through that, providing any feedback or suggestions, of course, based on the recommendations of our brilliant staff. So more to come on that one. Tomorrow night in this room at 6 p.m. is our PROS meeting, which is Parks, Recreation, Open Space, and Trails. We love public comment and involvement. So if you would like to attend, it's open to the public. So please come. It's at 6 p.m. It's a very friendly group here in this room. So we hope to see you then. On Monday, the 17th at Rocky Mountain High School, it is the Mental Health Matters event by Poudre School District. And it's a follow-up to some of the other mental health items that PSD has put on. So there'll be speakers and other conversations about school security and some other items there. I do recommend that people attend if they're interested. Rocky Mountain High School, Monday, 5:30 p.m., Mental Health Matters. This weekend, starting on Friday evening, will be the first of this current school. I don't know, previous Wellington High School it will be the first of Wellington Middle High School Drama Club play. They're doing Radium Girls. And that's Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday. Tickets are available on school pay. So please go out and support our students. We hear a lot about sports, and I love those too. But we also have a drama club, and they have their first play ever. So very exciting news there. They're also going to be the same drama club all through the end of high school. So these same kids are going to be doing plays for 5 years. I cannot wait to see what they pull off. It's going to be amazing. I've been talking to a lot of community members and getting a lot more details on some of the crisis that's going on in our community. I have some very major concerns regarding mental and medical health care, specifically for our youth, and then also the strain of childcare expenses on our families. This is nothing new. This is not a surprise. Oh my gosh, childcare is a problem. But I did hear some stats recently that some families pay up to 37% of their income on childcare expenses. And some of the other stats I learned about were appalling. So I'm just hoping that we can pay attention to that and put as much focus on that in the future too, or just keep that as a consideration as we're doing our business. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Gaiter.
Awesome. So want to thank Betty again, just for working together with everyone in the community. It was so great to have those, and I would love to do another one and let people know what came out of them talking to us. But excited to kind of pursue this and see where we go from here. So thank you again for coming out tonight and presenting, and thank you for all the work you put into this. Again, if you didn't catch this, her nonprofit raised over 90% of the funds that was used for this transportation. That is a huge deal. So huge thank you to Betty and the work that you're doing. And she's a member of our community here. And I think just recently moved up here in the last few years and immediately engaging. And you know what? I tell people all the time, we don't always have to agree on everything, but let's find the things we can work together on and let's work through that. So really excited to work from here. Two things wanted to highlight. At an upcoming board meeting, I don't know if it's a work session or whatnot, we will be, so if you recall back in 2021, as part of our budget process, staff had proposed looking at some increases in the trustee pay. At the time being, the board felt it wasn't the right time to look into that. I did ask the finance committee to just kind of run some numbers. So Charity pulled some numbers from surrounding areas. They had some conversation about that. Jason Mellon will be, a member of the finance committee, will be coming to present to the board kind of what they have found and some suggestions to put into the budget considerations for next year. So in clarification on that, the way that works is even if we were to change the trustee and mayor pay, that does not take effect until newly elected officials come in. So if I'm in the middle of my term and the pay changes, my pay stays the same as it was when I was elected. You don't actually get the new pay until it actually you're reelected. The idea being you can't just up your own paycheck. But that will be brought back to the board. So just aware of that'll be in the next few months will be brought to us, and then just for something that we can consider whether or not it's appropriate to include into budget moving forward. Second thing, wanted to remind everyone this Saturday, we have the event with LCSO. So again, thank you to the mayor for okaying the have staff work through this. And thank you to Patti for working with Sergeant Cherry, and thank you to LCSO. Our corporal is here in the room, but we're going to be having a chance this weekend to go down to LCSO's office. I gather we're going to do some training and probably learn just how hard our guys are working. But I talked to Sergeant Cherry this week, and he said just the connection and the people showing up from Wellington, both from the board and from staff showing up, they kind of got moved into a joint effort between us and Berthoud because they also contract with LCSO. And he said the engagement from Wellington has been really great. So I'm very excited about that this Saturday, and really just grateful for what LCSO is doing, but looking forward to that event this weekend. So again, thank you to everyone for making that happen. I'm excited about it.
Trustee Teets.
I will make mine very quick. I do feel that Brian deserved a response to his question and understanding what happened. So when it came to my vote, my main trigger point, I supported everything besides the C1 in the area that I am very concerned about for the residents that live there. That was my main concern for that. And without any kind of exception to help agree to even work towards protecting them, I just couldn't support something like that. So other than that, everything else we pretty much aligned on. That was the one thing that I just couldn't get past on that one. On other news, Wednesday, April 26th at 6 p.m., we are having a volunteer appreciation dinner to go along with Volunteer Appreciation Month for April. So I'm very excited to get to work with some of our town staff and planning this event. And it's actually been rather fun. The volunteer gifts are amazing. So they turned out very cool. So I'm very excited. And apparently Siri is tracking everything I say. So other than that, that's all I have right now. Thanks.
Sorry, I had one other thing I forgot. I'm so sorry. I'll be super quick.
Okay, go.
Okay. One other thing, National Night Out is going to be in August of this year. Last year, I think was the first time Wellington ever did anything. And I just did that at my home, had people over, made ribs. It was great. Our sheriff came out. One thing I wanted to bring to the board is rather than just being, I'm going to host again this year, if that, but I'd actually like to see if we're open to making that something that we do as the town, not using town money, but basically just if we could work to make it a permanent event and cover any cost for that and just get all members of the community, publish it, post it, encourage people to come out to like Centennial Parks instead of it being at my house, just have everyone engage and make it something that it's not I'm putting it on, but the town is saying, hey, we support law enforcement, would love our community to come out and do that at Centennial Park. So I don't know if we are okay with looking into the possibility of doing that, I don't know what comes in with that. It may be something where staff's like, hey, there's all these other things that happen that we can't do it. If we can't, great. But if you guys are open to that, I'd love to explore the idea again, not staff spending tons of time, but just making an event of the town that we can then publish and encourage the whole community to come out to one place. So that was my only other thing.
All in favor? Aye. Aye. Okay, cool. Thank you. Yes, good remembering that. I have nothing to report other than I like working with you guys. I like this town and thanks for coming to the meeting. May I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Make it a roll call.
Certainly. Trustee Gaiter,
Yes.
trustee Daly,
Yes.
trustee Mason,
Yes.
trustee Teets,
Yes.
trustee Wiegand,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem McDonald,
Yes.
Mayor Chaussee.
Yes.
Thank you.
You got it, Dave. Dave, you got it. Or no.
All of the work.
Oh.
So I actually go a lot of
I said that was long as you think, so I guess I'm.
Didn't matter what you did.
That's right. Cool.
My last one too. I got a correction that. I don't know, probably not.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, work on the map. Absolutely.
So I did put in.
Well done.
Yeah, I was like, man, I know, I'm like, when I was standing up there, I'm like, I felt like I had some beads on my face. I'm like, oh, this is so weird.
Yeah. You know.
I know.
Winter pocket.
Yeah, I know.